The vast, indifferent blue of the Mediterranean stretched to the horizon, its surface shimmering under a sun that seemed to witness everything and judge nothing. Upon this ancient sea, a small, defiant convoy of ships pressed onward. This was the Global Sumud Flotilla, a patchwork fleet of civilian vessels carrying a cargo of hope and a message etched in the very meaning of its name: Sumud, steadfastness. The ships, weathered but determined, were not just navigating water. They were navigating a political and humanitarian blockade. Their holds were filled not with weapons, but with life: pallets of fortified flour, essential medicines, water purification tablets, and therapeutic food for infants. Yet their most precious cargo was intangible: the collective conscience of the global community, a tangible refusal to let 2.3 million people in Gaza be forgotten. The passengers were a mosaic of humanity: doctors from Argentina, teachers from Indonesia, retired engineers from Norway, and human rights observers from South Africa. Their faces were lined with the fatigue of a long journey, but their eyes burned with a resolve that only injustice can ignite. They were the eyes of the world, sailing towards a man-made hell to say, "You are not alone." The hell they sailed towards was Gaza. For months, the world had watched, some in horror, many in helpless frustration, as Israel unleashed a brutal military campaign of collective punishment. The justification was a tragic conflict, but the response was a disproportionate avalanche of destruction that has been condemned globally as a severe violation of international law. The evidence of this oppression, or zulm, as the flotilla volunteers called it, was overwhelming. Satellite imagery showed neighborhoods reduced to square kilometers of gray rubble, resembling the surface of the moon. Landmarks of civil society, hospitals, universities, libraries, and mosques lay in ruins, systematically targeted and destroyed. The once vibrant streets were now graveyards for concrete and dreams. But the most devastating toll was human. As the flotilla sailed, the number of Palestinian martyrs killed by the Israeli assault had shockingly surpassed 35,000 souls. This was not just a statistic. It was a nation in mourning. Among them were over 15,000 children, boys and girls who had been playing, learning, and dreaming just weeks before. They were not collateral damage. They were the primary target of a war waged in one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Each number was a life extinguished, a future erased, a family shattered. Fathers, mothers, artists, engineers, and an entire generation of children were gone. For those who survived, life had become a daily struggle against a manufactured famine. Israel's comprehensive siege had cut off food, clean water, fuel, and medicine. The United Nations and aid agencies warned of a full-blown famine, with children dying from malnutrition and dehydration. Parents were forced to feed their children animal feed or leaves. The sound of bombs was now accompanied by the silent, gnawing agony of hunger. It was into this abyss that the Sumud Flotilla sailed. Their mission was simple, yet profound: to break the siege. They knew they could not carry enough to feed everyone, but they carried a symbol. They were a challenge to the legality and morality of the blockade, a physical embodiment of the principle that the sea must remain a passage for humanity, not a wall of exclusion. On the lead ship, the Spirit of Humanity, an elderly doctor from Jordan named Dr. Amina spoke to the gathered volunteers. "They will call us provocateurs," she said, her voice steady. "They will say we are supporting militants. But look at our cargo. Look at our hands. We carry milk for babies, not missiles. We are doctors, not soldiers. Our only weapon is our conscience." As they entered the contested waters off Gaza's coast, the tension thickened. The volunteers donned their life jackets, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Soon, the silhouettes of much larger gray warships appeared, cutting through the waves with menacing speed. The Israeli Navy had arrived. A voice crackled over the radio, loud and authoritative. "Unidentified vessels, you are attempting to breach a legal naval blockade established by the State of Israel. Heave to and prepare for inspection. Do not proceed further. The captain of the Spirit of Humanity, a grizzled Greek mariner named Yanis, picked up the radio. Israeli warship, this is the civilian vessel Spirit of Humanity. We are on a humanitarian mission. Our cargo is food and medicine for the starving people of Gaza. We are unarmed and pose no threat. We request safe passage. The response was immediate. Your passage is denied. Your cargo can be transferred through the approved channels. Heave to immediately, or we will be forced to take action. The volunteers looked at one another. This was the moment they had prepared for. They linked arms on the deck, a human chain of solidarity. They began to sing songs of peace in different languages, their voices a fragile but defiant chorus against the roar of the warship's engines. The warships drew closer, and armed masked soldiers could be seen preparing to board. The flotilla did not stop. They continued their slow, purposeful progress towards the shore, now a faint smudge on the horizon. The world watched live feeds, holding its breath. The standoff was no longer just about delivering aid. It was about the fundamental right to exist, the right to receive help, and the right of civilians to challenge the might of a military power with nothing but moral conviction. The Israeli commandos descended onto the decks, their weapons drawn. The volunteers offered no physical resistance. They sat, their hands visible, repeating one word, over and over, in Arabic, in English, in Hebrew, peace, peace, salam, shalom. They were arrested, their cargo confiscated. In the eyes of the law, they had failed. But as the images of unarmed civilians being detained for carrying food for starving children flashed across the globe, a different story was written. The Sumud Flotilla had succeeded in its most crucial mission. It had ripped away the veil of normalcy from the blockade and exposed the raw, brutal reality of Gaza for all to see. They had become the voice for the voiceless, and their journey, though interrupted, ignited a fire of global outrage that would long outlast their temporary detention. The sea had been crossed, not with cargo, but with a message, the message of Sumud, and that no navy in the world could confiscate.